So thank you all for staying back. I'm Zulekha Chaudhary from the Al-Qazi Theatre Archives. And before we start, although everybody from the performance has left, anyway, I'd like to congratulate them for whoever's listening or not. It was really quite a thought-provoking production. The Al-Qazi Theatre Archives is a privately owned collection initiated in 2016. The collection centers around the theatre practice of its founder, Ibrahim Al-Qazi, expanding to the work of his theatre contemporaries who hail primarily from the post-independence era. In addition, the Al-Qazi Theatre Archives believes that a dialogue with contemporary practices allows for a telescopic view of how historical contexts and legacies of theatre practices have informed different theatre content and form, allowing us to trace historical chronologies, ideologies, methods, processes as a map that is complex, networked, and hypertextual. Collecting Practices is an umbrella program of the Al-Qazi Theatre Archives, foregrounding histories, processes, and conceptual formulations of making and performance. Collecting Practices 1 and 2, which were in 2016 and 2017, focused on documenting the informal and embodied discourses of artistic practice, concentrating on acting methods and ideologies. Collecting Practices 3, Rehearsing the Nation, is a series of 3 talks considering theatre as a lens to read multiple histories. Each talk in the series has been associated with the production here at Black Box Okhla. The first of the series was Culture, History, Theory with Anita Cherian and Brahma Prakash, and was in relation to the performance of For the Record, directed by Nikhil Mehta. The second of the series constituted discussions on citizenship and its relationship to theatre. Theatre and the Citizen was led by actor-director Sudhanva Deshpande, preceded by the performance of Rehla by the Aghas Theatre Trust, directed by Neil Chaudhary. Theatre's potential for making the world comprehensible is integral to its ability to occupy and constitute a public space. Special value is placed on theatre's power to create a new real, to make the real manifest and situate ideas in the realm of discursivity with images and sensations. Whether or not theatre has a singular ability to change reality outside the theatre, it does contribute to formulating what we understand as reality. By contributing to debates and disputes in public life, theatre participates in what we know and how we come to know it. Like other media that claim to have a special relationship to events in the real world, theatre can make a generative and critical intervention in people's prejudices and the limitations of public understanding. Theatre can also oversimplify, inflame prejudices, and support one-sided perspectives. Framed by public events and discourses that determine its reception, the occasions that have engendered the performance and political intentions of the artist, theatre is dependent upon opinion even as it shapes it. Add to this the transparency or lack thereof of forms of documentations from which theatre is created, and we begin to approach its epistemological possibilities and limitations. So today's talk is the last of the series and is called Women on Stage, which considers women, protest, and performance. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd just like to read a quote from Judith Butler. She described, which is a small section of her speech at the Occupy Wall Street in 2011. It matters that as bodies we arrive together in public, that we are assembling in public. We are coming together as bodies in alliance in the street and in the square. As bodies we suffer, we require shelter and food, and as bodies we require one another and desire one another. So this is a politics of the public body, the requirements of the body, its movement and voice. We sit and stand and move and speak as we can, as the popular will, the one that electoral democracy has forgotten and abandoned. But we are here and remain here, enacting the phrase, we the people. Today's talk, Lata Singh will specifically foreground women performers in historiography, where the lives of modern theatre actresses in colonial India were indicative of the contradictions of a new world of middle-class cultural production. An attempt would also be made in her presentation to examine the way theatre performance is getting gendered, where gendering performance has led to the difficult task of contending with conventions of performance and representations that are patriarchal. After which Dr. Hameed will look at the question of women and citizenship, particularly looking at contemporary protests led by women in the country. Are these protests molding a new face of the woman citizen in India? Are the women protesters creating a space where the voice of the marginalized can be heard loud and clear? Although I'm sure both need no introduction, I will make a brief one. Dr. Lata Singh is an associate professor at the Center for Women's Studies, JNU. Her areas of interest are colonialism, nationalism, women's movement, gender and performance studies. Dr. Singh has authored several books, including Theatre in Colonial India, Playhouse of Power in 2009, popular translations of nationalism, Bihar 1920 to 22 in 2012, Raising the Curtain, Recasting Women Performers in India, amongst others. She is on the editorial board of the Dutch Journal of Feminist Studies and a member of the Advisory Committee for Women's Studies. Let me do the last one, at least. She is the guest editor of the Indian Historical Review on issues of gender, colonial and post-colonial India. Dr. Hameed is a former member of the Planning Commission of India and former member of the National Commission for Women. She is a feminist and a writer who is widely recognized for her passionate engagement in public affairs and social issues, especially for women, minorities and peace. She is the founder member of the Muslim Women's Forum. Dr. Hameed's Pathwaking Breaking Reports, Voices of the Voiceless, Status of Women in India in 2000, and My Voice Shall Be Heard in 2002, led to major interventions in policy formations, and her second report led the government to constitute a high-level committee under Justice Sachar in 2003. She has authored several major publications and has been the recipient of the Padma Shri in 2007, Al-Amin All India Community Leadership Award in 2006, B. Amma Award in 2012, and the Delhi Women of the Decade's Achiever Award, Excellence in Governance in 2013. So I'm first going to ask Lata to begin.
Thank you, Zulekha. It's an honor for me because I was taught by Ibrahim Al-Qazi. I was a student in the direction. Nisar was there to teach me also. Amal was also there. I mean, from there I ventured into the research area of gender and performance. That's how I came into it. I'll just flag out few things because, I'll be mapping a little larger canvas. Trying to look at the entrance of the women performers and actresses in from colonial period. And what's very significant is that, when one talks of gender, everybody now says it's not a homogeneous category. We are intersecting with caste, class, race, minority, ethnicity, sexuality. But it's also very interesting if we foreground women performers. I mean, if you talk to any class of people from subaltern to Dalit women to the middle class women, there's certain very unsettling about that category. It was during my field work in Maharashtra when I was talking to the Tamasha women from the Dalit communities, how one Dalit community looks down upon the other Dalit community, like Kulhatis and all, because their women have come to the performance. So what is so unsettling about this profession in the category of gender, that was one of my area of research. And that brought me very closer to one of the area, which is women in the media. You know, when we look at early days of women in the media, we know that these are the two professions which is really unsettling, because they are unsettling with a very different time frame for work. When a good woman is supposed to be back home by evening, these actresses and the women, these are there out, venturing out in the night. And during one of my interview with Chitra Singh, who was with the political theatre in Calcutta, and she came with part of the group theatre, she said when she used to return home in the night, I mean, you know, neighbors would just turn the curtain around and say, oh, bari fire gache. I mean, she's returned home. So, I mean, this is one of the profession which does not dovetail very well with the domesticity, you know. You can be a good professional woman and you can also carry on your domestic work. And number two is, this is another one, it transgresses many other categories of boundaries. A theatre commune, working late night, traveling together, intermixing caste, physicality. So something, I mean, you know, something around sexuality which is always talked about, suspicion around them. And that's, I mean, that is why, you know, this is one of the, though we talk about private and public space, but where do you foreground? These were the most public women. Even today, I mean, one may not be very happy with the Bollywood, many of the films, but anybody has a right to talk about their private lives. So, you know, so there's certain things that made them so unsettling. And if we look at history also, we find that the performing communities, if you look at from the ancient period onwards, they always lived on the fringe of the village or something. They were not part of the Brahminical social order also. Entire performing communities, not only the women in that. Now I come back, you know, since I'm going to trace the history from the colonial period. The colonial period, it's very interesting. There were two things were happening simultaneously in the colonial period. Most of the studies have brought out the construction of a good ideal, Sugrihini, the women, and the construction of the other women. You know, women on the street, where many of them, like Hukum Sangari and all in her work has talked about, they are, you know, those women on the street, and among, they are the other, they are vulgar, they are, you know, sexually, you cannot, you know, they're charged. So within that also category, the women performers really fell on the other of the so-called ideal. And there were two constructions simultaneously happening, and the whole debate in the colonial period will find whenever there's a reference coming to the actress, it's a Vaishya or it's a prostitute actress. So this is very co-mingling, and a very fuzzy boundary was throughout all the discourse. The colonial, both, as the middle class was emerging with the social reforms movement and the colonial discourse, they somehow converged together. And you will find that even the socio-religious reform, if you look at the history of the socio-religious reform movements, Arya Samaj, Brahmo Samaj, they were all warning their women that they should not go and watch theatre. Sumanta Banerjee has talked about in the context of Bengal, how when the Bhadra Mahila was getting constructed, how, you know, the whole thing was that these women should not be mingling with those people who used to come for performance, whose songs were very rustic, sensuous. They should keep themselves away from it. So the othering of this was happening also, but this was also a period when there was, you know, the culture was at the encounter with the colonial vis-a-vis the middle class. So culture became at the as a center site. So they were condemning, on the one hand, they were condemning people going out to theatre, but they were also talking about their own creation of their own high art vis-a-vis the art of the colonial world, like Shakespeare, with G.P. Deshpande and all has brought out how they were trying to talk about their classical culture. Now the thing is, modern theatre in Calcutta, in Bombay, 1870s with Michael Madhusudan Dutt and all starts with the modern theatre, because they are also claiming that they have something high art, modern, classical, linking it up with the classical art, their culture. But now what happens to that theatre? Their own women cannot be exhibited for public consumption. Obviously, there was a need now. They felt who should be performing. That was the era of a female. I mean, that time, many of the works have quoted their works, female impersonator with Bal Gandharva, Jai Shankar Sundari. They became icon, but there have been many, many others also. So that's another very interesting debate which happened around the female impersonation, and which many of our later women directors have taken up their productions in 90s and all. So that was the era, but somehow by 1870s, in Bengal, there was a strong pressure that the women's role should be performed by women, not the men. Later in Maharashtra also by 1910, this whole pressure started building up. There's again very interesting debate around female impersonation, because with Catherine Hansen and all has worked on the Maharashtra. But what is very significant is that her argument has been that it coexisted along with the homoeroticism because there was a demand for that. But the question then arises, then how do you look at the history of Bengal in that sense? Because in Bengal, once Michael Madhusudan starts bringing women to play the women, the coexistence of men and women were not so strong as it happened in Maharashtra. Should we look at the history, regional history, or should we just brush them aside with one argument which Catherine Hansen has talked about? But somehow, even in Maharashtra, if you look at 1910 onwards, the Rangbhumi theatre journals started coming out, and Rangbhumi, there was a big debate that we should have should Kulbadhu come to, Kulbadhu means women from a ideal good family should come to perform on the stage. And that's very interesting. I mean, though most of this writing is it's still there in Rangbhumi 1910 to 20 took place, and the argument was really very, very interesting, because it was said very strongly, the entire debate was, men were in the debate. There was only one woman who was in this debate in the Rangbhumi Theatre Journal, and this woman also said that morality is more higher than the art. Even if you want women for the art's sake, but our ideal, respectable Kulvadhu should not be acting, because if they perform openly with men, they cannot retain their chastity and virtue. How will their husbands look at them if they're performing with the other men? What happens if they have menstruation? So all that debate was happening by 1910 in Maharashtra in the Rangbhumi Theatre Journal, and they said, okay, if you really want to take women, then why don't you take prostitutes? I mean, in that way, now there were two arguments. One is the prostitutes have emotions, they play upon with emotions, so they can act really well. Number two, we will be reforming them, uplifting them, rehabilitating them. So, in that way, so the whole fear of the homoeroticism, or that was also a period by 1920s and all, the nation in the making, the masculinity and effeminacy debate was also happening, and the theatre as a site of their culture was also, the anxiety around that was also there. So it is in this background, there was a pressure was being built up to have women as an actresses on the modern theatre. Now, if you look at the biographies of these women, I mean, there's a 1910 Vidyabhushan, Upendranath Vidyabhushan, 1919, he writes a biography on Tinkori, it's in Bengali. He also writes a biography on Binodini and all that. What you find in the entire biography, where do these women come from? Totally missing. You just find a line or two lines saying they are coming from a forbidden, anonymous, or those localities which are, where the prostitutes are there. So, the thing is, the prostitute actress starts getting labeled around these women. But the question is, I mean, one needs to question, were these actually I don't want to say they were not prostitute, I don't want to get into that. But by just staying in those localities, by being single, by being, women-headed families, they were all getting bracketed under the construction of that prostitute. So it's very interesting if you look at, if you do a research around actresses, you'll be finding it's like a prostitute actresses, it's a vantage point also to entire discourse around shaping in India around the prostitutes question. And when women enters, you find the social religious reform like Keshav Chandra Sen's journal. He criticizes Michael Madhusudan Dutt for bringing the immoral women. Vidyasagar, who used to feel that theatre is very important for bringing social cause, he also walked out of the stage. Gradually, their entire contributions, and even if they want to acknowledge their contribution, you'll be finding their acting has been highly quoted, but what they don't want to talk about is their social background, where they're coming. Or they like to say, there's as if, how could these women who come from such a low background could do such a remarkable characters. It's a miracle. That's what Girish Chandra Ghosh also talks about Nati Vinodini. And that is what her life depicts, those contradictions about them. This is, interestingly, when we move, even when we move towards the progressive writers like Premchand, what their whole journey, their whole attitude towards the actress question. I'll just quote from two of his famous works. One was Seva Sadan, which is very famous. It is about a life of a Tawayaf and in Banaras, and the other is his short story Actress. And both, if you look at it, if you look at Seva Sadan, you'll find, it really starts off because Premchand critiques marriage, says, कि इन शादी में तो आप एक दुकान पे एक दुकान खोलते हैं और इनमें क्या फ़र्क है, one is one दुकान, one is multiple दुकान. He compares the courtesans with that and says that he critiques the institution of marriage. But ultimately his entire novel later shifts towards the protagonist who comes from a Brahmin community. When she takes up, becomes a Tawayaf, and how can a Hindu conservative society of Banaras take it up? He actually Premchand himself gives a very moralistic turn. She quits and she starts working in the charity house called Seva Sadan, where the children of these courtesans should be taught. Gives up her artistic agency. Similar is the Premchand story on Tara, actress, who was applauded on the stage. Anybody wanted to have a minute to meet her, talk to her. That well appreciated. One poor Sahab who's well educated, loves music and dance, falls in love, proposes to marry her, and then Tara, finally the character in Premchand, Tara goes through a guilt trip, and she says how can she deceive this poor Sahab who's going to defy the entire caste and all, and she actually quietly walks out of it. So very interesting. So that's even the progressive writers till 1940s, they were looking at it. And we do have some middle class women during the colonial period. We didn't have middle class women coming, but when one or two women started coming, like Durga Kote and all that, they also did not come there because it came through their artistic passion. Obviously Durga Kote, one knows, had lost her husband, and that's that's how she entered it. But what was the discourse when suddenly you find Premchand, Suman, a Brahmin, becomes a Tawayaf, or another middle class woman becoming an actress? There's a very powerful play at that time, 1940s, was a Kulbadhu by Rangmaker, and the whole uneasiness about, if a middle class woman will come, will she be able to save her respectability? Will she be, she'll be earning money in a very easy way, spend long hours from family, will do love scenes, dress fashionably, smoke, drink. Will her respectability be left behind? So in fact, till 1940s, you find very few cases of the middle class women. First time you find the middle class women entering You find with the political theatre called, in a big way, IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Association, linked up with the Marxist and the communist movement, who wanted to use it for expression and organizing people's struggle. But actually, if you look at their autobiographies, like Tripti Mitra, Reba Rai Chaudhary, most of their Sheila Bhatia and all that, the kind of opposition that they faced from their family members. They were, even the mainstream society would talk about them and say one of the used thing, Radhe Radhe, that is very talked about. So, but when you interview, when their biographies and their autobiographies and interviews says that they could withstand that kind of a pressure from their family or from the mainstream society because of the political conviction and the political commune, the support that they got from the commune. That's how. But interestingly, even if you look at these women's history in the performance, this is P.C. Joshi brought them together in a cultural squad. Most of these women had come from left movement. They were leaders in their own domain in the left movement. Here they just merely became actors. None of them were in the decision making in the IPTA organization. Neither were they in the directorial positions. And that's the trajectory. That's a trajectory which happens even in first decade. If you look at the women post-independence, 50s and 60s, what you find is now we have women. We did have women in the theatre. There were still fewer women as the women directors, and even if there were women directors, the way they were designing, the way they were, because they had to be accepted on par with the men as a director. So the language and grammar of theatre, they were unable to transgress. It's a period of 70s and 80s. That's a very interesting period. That's a period with obviously, when the women, I would like to bring the women's movement with the 80s, late 70s and 80s, how women's movement now looking at trying to recreate their culture, rediscover their culture. And we know that, women's movement had a workshop like Expression, Kriti, and some of us, like Anuradha is sitting here, she directed some of the plays within the women's movement, Maya Rao, Tripurari, Om Swaha, and many other plays. But by 80s, what you're finding is, even when many of the women directors say that we are not feminist, or we don't label us under that, but if you start looking at many of their productions, what you find, a different language to the theatre starts, the role of a director questioning the whole process, the collaborative, the notion of collective sisterhood, all that rough edges, all that starts happening. I just want to, because when we talk about women performers, we leave one large section away from this. Those are the women performers of the popular theatre. There's only, most of the popular theatres, if you go in different states, you'll find men performing women's role. Three places like Tamasha, Nautanki and Jatra, these women have entered. And Tamasha and Nautanki, they have entered in a big way. And when we need to address their question, we have to pose different questions linked up with the question of caste. Because most of these performances, like Tamasha and Nautanki, most of the performers are Dalit communities. How are the women performers facing the everyday life? On one hand, on the 26th January, we like to put up a plateau of, Tamasha as a national icon. We orchestrate them. But what about those performers? Who are they? What are their journeys? What are their struggles? Still you find, and there's a whole debate, there's a very interesting debate which is also happening in Maharashtra around women in Tamasha, because they are coming from Kulhati community, which is where the Brahminical caste order says they can't marry. They have to either entertain or go through sexual license. There's an interesting, very contested debate amongst the Dalit movement, amongst the feminists, amongst the sexuality right. And this, one of the play which was staged on them was by Prari Sharma, like Rang Dhuli, where she traces the journey of these women bearing community Nautanki from Mela, fair, Nautanki to the beer bar.
Thank you very much, Zulekha. And you know, I really am, I don't know really how to frame what I want to say, so please bear with me and my hesitations. I think Anuradha is sitting here, and I've had the privilege of, I mean, I'm really honored to be here, because that was knowing Ibrahim Al-Qazi Sahab and Amal and Nisar, and now for the first time Zulekha. I'm so honored, because this is what my passion was, and I could never pursue that passion, except thanks to Anuradha. I did get an opportunity to do some extended reading in Krishna Sokti's Dilo Danish, and that is very cherished in my heart, though I was, you know, she said I'm Women's Commission, Planning Commission, and all of those things, and Dilo Danish. To me, Dilo Danish is what really makes a difference in my life. So I'm just going to, I mean, I don't know much theory, I can't comment, but on even the brief that you gave me, Zulekha, but this one sentence from your brief, which was, theatre as a lens through which to read history. That somehow jumped out at me, and I thought, let me just use that. And I thought this was going to be a talk, I mean a discussion, baatcheet.
It will be.
Okay, so I'll just be, I'll thoda a little bit, and I'll do a little bit of poetry also, because for me this, I mean, that's also my first theatre, second poetry. That's where my priorities are, and then public life after that. I'm a Kashmir born. I live in Jamia, so on, you know, Shaheen Bagh is just like my neighborhood. People never used to come, oh, you live in Jamia, my goodness, it's so far, and this and all of that. And then when the tension started, then people, you know, public transport, they stopped saying, when we, they normally, the Uber and all used to turn us down. Acha, Jamia jana hai? Nahi. Kahan jana hai? Tiko na, no. Batla house to never. So that phase has now, everyone is in Jamia. Anyway, so welcome to Jamia. My house is right there. We also had a performance of Dilo Danish in Jamia, and happens to be my house, but it was, you know, it lends itself to this kind of performance and theatre as a lens through which to read history. Okay, so let me just talk about what I know. I did that report in 2000, Voice of the Voiceless, Status of Muslim Women in India. And 3 years later, as Zulekha said, I did My Voice Shall Be Heard as a kind of a sequel and follow-up. I was too stupid to think that, I mean, so stupid that I thought something would change in 3 years, but nothing did. But anyway, I went through the whole public hearings of Muslim women across the country. So I know a little bit on the Muslim women, the issue of Muslim women. Now, as far as Shaheen Bagh is concerned, very briefly, how many people have been to Shaheen Bagh? Oh, lots. Whew. Twice, I've only been twice, and himmat to go again, but I've spent so many years in Canada that I hate the cold. So I could not possibly, I was, anyway. The setting, as you know, is a theatre setting. It's a natural theatre, what's happening in Shaheen Bagh today. But Shaheen Baghs used to happen, you know, sporadically all over. Abul Fazl Enclave, Jasola, Ghaffar Manzil, all together about 17, not 17, I think that would take me to also Sukhdev Bihar, but about 9 or 10 such areas comprise Jamia. And little Shaheen Baghs used to happen all over. But this time it has happened, and it has happened in a sense, it has a, in my life it has a history, because to me, Parveena Ahangar's APDP, okay, everyone knows what APDP is, Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons. So that is another theatre which is in my birthplace. And Parveena has sat for the last 26 years with her all those parents whose children have disappeared. On the 10th of every month, they sit in a park, any park. Sometimes they are shooed away from there, sometimes they are pushed away from there. But that is where the theatre unfolds, in Srinagar. And I mean, to me, that is something which again is a lens through which to read history. The history of APDP, the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons. Each one of them hugging the photograph of the son who has disappeared 10, 12, 15 years ago, and anything less than 26 years. Okay, now this protest that is happening in Shaheen Bagh, and what is Shaheen Bagh? It is a nondescript gully of where I live, and a kind of it's a network of gullies. And all that people think of is खाना बहुत अच्छा मिलता है, बिरयानी मिलती है, कौरमा मिलता है, सीख कबाब, शामी कबाब, that's the place to go for food. But something else has happened there. And this, in the second coldest winter in Delhi for 119 years, are these enormous numbers of women. Now these women obviously have never been in a protest. And if they have been in a protest, they've always been for burqa, char diwari, chulha, triple talaq, polygamy, all the issues that Muslim women, for them, that's where they are taken out of their homes, brought out by the mullahs, and everyone watches them with it lining up in front of polling booths with the mark on their finger. So that is another kind of a row of Muslim women that you see during elections, wherever it is. Even if it's a part of the country where there are only 5% Muslim, they'll have lines of Muslim women. And then this whole thing of hijab, burqa. I've never worn a hijab, I've never worn a burqa. So although I'm a very good scholar of the Quran, I read every day, I understand, but I don't adhere to that image. So that's my own personal decision, and that's also a long history, and I don't want to be that long. So let me go and talk about the dadis of Shaheen Bagh. How many have seen the dadis of Shaheen Bagh? Okay. So these are three women. There is a 93-year-old Asma, there is 82-year-old Sarwari, and 79-year-old Bilqis. And they say, अरे इतने जुल्म हुए हैं, इतनी lynching हुई है, हम बर्दाश्त नहीं कर सकते. And there is, I could not, I mean, I belong to Panipat. Panipat is known for, of course, the movie Panipat, but Panipat is, people are supposed to be very ladaku in Panipat. And women are generally, it was a very matriarchal society in Panipat. So there was a certain boldness about the women, which I never found when I, in Jamia. But Sarwari, Bilqis and Asma, they were just like, they cut the ice completely, totally, and they towered over that discussion. and I saw them also when I went twice to Shaheen Bagh. And they said, this time what is very interesting is कि हम संविधान पे जुल्म बर्दाश्त नहीं कर सकते. And then they said, and then the kind of poetry, I must recite it to you. You know, there is a very famous line from Allama Iqbal, and it's about, you know what is a Shaheen? A Shaheen is a falcon, okay? So Allama Iqbal says, Tu Shahi hai, parwaz hai, kaam tera. So, you know, you are the falcon, your job is to, you know, you just keep flying. Tu Shahi hai, parwaz hai, kaam tera, tere samne asma aur bhi hai. You know, they say there are 7 skies, but sky is the limit and there are more skies. So you just keep on soaring and soaring and soaring. So that is the kind of slogan that is written, along with slogans in which the Hitler mask is planted over Modi. And there is no hesitation for them to condemn the present regime. They are all, I mean, they have so much agency, but that's only today. Yesterday that you could never see that. So that's something that I wanted to share with you. And then, of course, the other thing is that how it's linked up with Jamia. By the way, tomorrow there is a march from Holy Family to Shaheen Bagh, called by Seba, one of the secretaries of All India Democratic Women's Association, and many, many others. So the linking with Jamia and the word, देखें उन्होंने हमारी लड़कियों को कैसा मारा घुस के लाइब्रेरी में, how they beat up our girls in the lab. And so we asked her, I didn't ask her, someone else asked her, तो आप क्यों आई हैं यहाँ? It's so cold, आप यहाँ बैठी हैं. मेरी बच्ची मुझसे कहती है कि अगर तुम नहीं गई तो कल को मेरे स्कूल में घुस के मुझे न मारे. This is a woman called Hina. So the daughter has said, if you don't go, then tomorrow they'll come into my school and they'll beat us up. So this sentiment you find. And the other thing I found, which I would like to share with you, and then I'll just open it up and ask Zulekha to open to question, is the men, the role of the men. So this, you must have seen, they're standing in a ring around the women. You know, they just stand like that, and you kind of find them, they have lost a little bit of their agency. वो ऐसे जैसे हमारे कहते हैं भीगी बिल्ली की तरह खड़े हुए, like the bhigi biyar, you remember in Dilo Danish. So they have this. There is a whole the story about the kind of the men that hang around, and they are the ones who are getting the food and the biryani, and I'm sure there are very small portions of biryani because it's to feed such a huge crowd. Now, these women, you could not get them out for anything. We've all tried in our own way, unless the Maulanas went and said, Bibi, Islam is in danger, you have to come out. Then, something would have happened. But for the first time, they are coming out for Samvidhan. For the first time, they're coming out for the Desh. And the very important thing is, very strongly, this sentiment is running throughout कि ये हिंदू मुस्लिम की लड़ाई नहीं है, हम सब एक हैं, हम एक then this whole thing, हम एक दूसरे के यहाँ ईद पे, दिवाली पे, होली पे, all of that comes out. मगर मरने में, जीने में, मौत में, ज़िंदगी में हम साथ हैं. So how it is not, it is we are all in it together. और हमें अपनी जमहूरियत को बचाना है. We have to save democracy. हमें अपने मुल्क को बचाना है. We have to save our country. And we are not going to move till Amit Shah and Modi, they don't rescind it, they don't cancel it. We will not show papers. And of course then hum kagaz nahi dikhayenge and all that music rolls in. But before I end, I want to just read out to you one poem that was specially written for Shaheen Bagh by one of my very close relatives, and I promised her that I'll read it, and she said, please tell. Her name is Azra Naqvi, and she wrote this for Shaheen Bagh, and I want to recite it to you. So, ab suniye. नन्हे बच्चों की दिलकश हंसी के लिए, for the laughter of small children. नन्हे बच्चों की दिलकश हंसी के लिए, मेरे प्यारे वतन तेरी हर हर गली के लिए. My beloved country, for every lane. जिंदगी के लिए, for life. अमन इंसाफ की रोशनी चाहिए. We need the light of peace and justice. नन्हे बच्चों की दिलकश हंसी के लिए, मेरे प्यारे वतन तेरी हर हर गली के लिए, ज़िंदगी के लिए अमन व इंसाफ की रोशनी चाहिए. इस दुआ के लिए, फॉर द सेक ऑफ द प्रेयर, सर्द रातों में हम अपने बच्चों को गोदों में लेकर निकल आए हैं. इन दीज coldest of nights, we have taken our babies in our arms and we have come out. मेरे प्यारे वतन, हम हैं आइन के पासबा. The word आइन, please include it in your vocabulary now. It means constitution. I think it's a very nice word for constitution. संविधान, आइन, constitution. मेरे प्यारे वतन, हम हैं आइन के पासबा. कुछ सियासत नहीं, कोई नारा नहीं. We are not into doing any politics. कोई सियासत नहीं, कोई नारा नहीं. देश पर नफरतों का इजारा नहीं. The word ijara means right. Hatred has no right over this land. कोई सियासत नहीं, कोई नारा नहीं, देश पर नफरतों का इजारा नहीं. अमन व इंसाफ की ज़िंदगी मांगना हक हमारा नहीं. When they say that we will be, we'll be asked, as we saw in this wonderful play, that कागज़ कहाँ से लाएंगे? वो तो they are all being, बारिश में भीग गए, destroy हो गए, garbage में फेंक गए, and then अमन व इंसाफ की ज़िंदगी मांगना हक हमारा नहीं. Where are we going to bring that proof that we belong to this land? And then those women, Asma and Bilqis, they say that हम यहाँ ही पैदा हुए हैं, हम यहीं मरेंगे. 93 years old, 87 years old and 79 years old. हमें कोई यहाँ से उखाड़ नहीं सकता. कौन उखाड़ेगा हमें? With the kind of authority that would make anyone snap to attention. इस अमन इंसाफ की ज़िंदगी मांगना हक हमारा नहीं. बच्चियाँ, औरतें, लड़कियाँ, हम तिरंगे की छाँव तले, under the shade of the tricolor. And today Tazeen was telling me they declared it was Flag Day or Tricolor Day. So the whole place was just plastered with the flags. This is the walls. As you drive into Jamia, we didn't go as far as the Shaheen Bagh. हम तिरंगे की छाँव तले, अमन व इंसाफ की चांदनी के लिए, आश्ती के लिए. Ashti is another word you can include in your vocabulary. Ashti means peace. Some names are, people like to call their little girls Ashti. हम तिरंगे की छाँव तले, अमन व इंसाफ की चांदनी के लिए, आश्ती के लिए आज घर से निकल आए हैं. So that's the spirit of the theatre which is now happening in this very far out, depressed, decrepit, but very alive place. And I often think that in case, if something happens, like some violence happens, the population there is so dense. The houses are so close together, the gullies are so narrow. It's going to be mass destruction. So these are some of the thoughts. I don't know, I suppose I don't know if I've been able to satisfy Zulekha or not, but I could only share with you, my own feelings and what I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hameed. Before I open out to questions, actually, I do have a question for Anuradha, although she's saying she probably doesn't want to answer it. But I was actually, in the last couple of days, as whatever, all these protests have been happening, I was actually thinking about you because I knew you were rehearsing this work. And I was thinking about what it means to make a work like this at this time. Not just for the content of it, but also I suppose that you are in rehearsals while there's also everybody's out, and I was wondering maybe you'd like to talk a bit just about how I feel it's an exceptional time that we're in, and so what is it to make a theatre performance, or I guess at this time?
Well, I think let me just, I'll quote something that we were working on, and I think we'll continue to work on, is Brecht. And in the Messinkoff dialogues, he says, you've got to, there are certain times where आपके पाँव के नीचे से धरती निकल जा रही है, और ऐसी, where you are is a time of grave problems. But then, do you stop talking about art making, or do you stop making art? And then he says, and I think that's where perhaps I might say that maybe one part of the dialogue would be that you do what you think you know best, or in which way you can maybe open more dialogues or spaces of thinking, or spaces even of being able to register the fact that there is such a, as you say, exceptional times in a kind of state of emergency, if you like. So I think that there must be some manner of being able to relate what we are feeling at this moment and the ways that we might express it. I'm not saying that this work has some direct connection, but I'm saying at the moment perhaps doing work like thinking or writing or making a performance is as much on one's mind, because the spaces of possibility seem to be contracting, or like becoming immediately difficult to say. For instance, what can you say in a certain performance? Can you say, can you make a direct reference, or is it going to provoke something like what happened in Serendipity? So I'm just saying these are all things like opening out, and perhaps that could be the only way of understanding doing a work like this at this time. And I think maybe this is going to be something that is a long time proposal, if you like, to be able to try and do work which has some reference, and not necessarily direct reference, but at least to try and do work where spaces of doing work is being reduced.
I'd like to open out questions, if anyone has any.
Can I say one little thing? I just want to share with you that about 2 years ago, and this is again, how it can translate into theatre. I'm talking of path breakers. So we in Muslim women stereotype talked about it. So we, a few of us decided to project Muslim women who became architects in building India post-partition. And so we picked 23 Muslim women who all joined the project of building India with Nehru, and that Nehruvian, that whole leadership. And nobody knows that the Indian flag was designed by Muslim women called Suraya Tayyabji. Nobody, and I'm sure Amal and Nisar know it, but how many people know, this is a booklet I'm going to leave with you, Amal, that this woman started, her name was Qudsiya Zaidi, and she started the Hindustani theatre, the first Hindustani theatre, And, you know, I mean, Anuradha, of course, would know it because we all grew up with her influence. But so, you know, break the stereotype. So we did this, and it became, and we showed it in many parts of the country, and we'd still like to. Or this woman, who is actually the grandmother of Seema Mustafa and Aisha Kidwai, Anis Kidwai, whose book In Freedom's Shade today is, you know, one of the most important post-partition. So that Shaheen Bagh women, APDP women, and these path breakers. It's very interesting. I'm sorry I'm only talking of Muslim women, but so many people know so much more about, but I know a little bit about this area, and I really wanted to. I knew you'd be interested. That's why. Thank you.
Does anyone have any thoughts, questions?
I just wanted to say one small thing, is that listening to Syeda and then to Anuradha, where Anuradha, you've said that, you know, there's a certain amount of perhaps not knowing whether in art or in theatre one can, you know, speak out. And Syeda has just told us about the women who are just speaking out. So I think maybe this hesitancy on the part of theatre people or any artists to make a direct reference is something that we no longer have to think about. We have to just go out and do it, rather than feeling worried about whether we can say it directly or not.
Yeah.
Because so these women have and continue to do so.
Yes, yes, that is.
Thank you, Syeda ji. Thank you, Lata, for the wonderful presentation. I'm wondering whether Shaheen Bagh and Jamia students, but Jamia girls mainly, had also preempted theatre. In one way, life under Modi and Shah is preempting all sorts of science fiction and horror stories that we could have thought for future. They have preempted all. At the same time, people, and it's right, I think we should say it again and again, Muslim women and Muslim young girls, of course Shaheen Bagh ki dadi we have, but young girls, because this is not the public image we have. The public image of today, when we say public life, public protest, we don't see these images. So since they are out and not under any middle class leadership, under any call, they are out on their own, with their own organizational logistic. So we should say it again and again. I mean, thank you for saying it, and please don't apologize. We need to, all of us need to say it again and again. But also they are preempting theatre. What would have been many great theatre directors of the city, the country are here, but they are preempting. So we need to rethink what will be our theatre performance today in the context of this theatre, public place theatre that is happening.
Yeah. So Revati Asha from Chennai, she wanted to do, this is an exhibition with 6 by 2.5. These women are, you know, hung all over so she wanted to do a dance, and, you know, based on the path breakers. So that is one thing. And the other thing I wanted to also share is how the borders and boundaries are becoming irrelevant. You know, ऐसे दस्तूर को सुबह बेनूर को मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं जानता, दीप जिनका महल्लात ही में जले, जो के साए में मसलहत के पले, ऐसे दस्तूर को सुबह बेनूर को. You know, Habib Jalib. And then, of course, Faiz, though I don't even want to talk about Hum Dekhenge. But this is something which this movement has now thrown up. This, you know, poetry which has no border boundary. To kuch nahi hai na isme. So that's another part of this.
I want to thank both of you ladies for educating me more on a culture that I love very much. And what I realized through living in India and traveling to many other places and seeing this performance is now the world is And I feel that each country or each nation goes through these transformation and things that are going on when they're ready for it. And the countries that have done it before just preceded and were examples, and only examples, and not to be compared. Because we each do it in regards to our culture and what is close in our heart. And with that, we can change the world and change ourselves. So
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Actually, just want to add something small. I think that it's, I personally think it's not enough to just talk about Muslim women's agency, which we are seeing, but I think it's about what the breaking of stereotypes, what it is actually disrupting. You know, it's disrupting power structures, it's disrupting power structures between women from majority communities, upper caste, XYZ, where leadership is now coming from other places. And in a sense, traditional forms of protest or organizations of protest are having to play catch up, having to, finding themselves in solidarity positions, learning from, taking the leadership of students and working with them. I think these are very potent new forms of change, actually. So it's actually also we're seeing alliances in a different kind of way for it to. So it's not only Amit Shah and Modi who are surprised. I think we're all learning in this, because it's a terrific churning that's happening, it's disrupting lots of notions. You know, when a woman in a full hijab comes and speaks to an audience of 700 and says, I've never come out and spoken to people, and then proceeds to speak in fluent English about police atrocity, it just blows a lot of stereotypes, however liberal you think you are. And I think those are triggers of a lot of change. And I think, so there's a much bigger thing also that is being churned out at this moment. And it's potent and it's exciting and it's rich. So, and there are alliances, for instance, to just, be in Shaheen Bagh and see all those women with Ambedkar and Ambedkar slogans and look at the connections that have been made, that have intellectually been made among certain circles for a while, but not actually found a real rooting, even among groups that are trying to work with alliances. And I say this as people from the inside. I'm from the women's movement. We know how difficult these sort of forgings have been for us. But there are moments where they come together in an organic kind of way, and we need to learn and sort of leap to that moment. I think there are many lessons in this that are happening for us. And I found some of those reflections, I'd rather in the play, that where suddenly there's a connection that comes from in an unexpected moment. And I felt that was a reflection of where sort of the kind of energies that are pulsating outside of this space, and I really felt connected at that point. So I wanted to say salam for that.
This is actually a question from a young woman growing up in India to you guys. Actually, whatever you said that was phenomenal. I mean, I've studied literature and I've studied parts of what you were talking about. So I was slightly nervous because this question is slightly away from what you guys are talking about. So I've always wondered, when you're talking about representation of women in visual space, in theatre, in cinema, in Shaheen Bagh, protest, everything, I want to understand what has been the journey of men when they look at women like that. Because, I am somebody who's growing up in an urban space, and I see men around myself all the time, and I see how they react to me when I talk about feminism. And in my life, I have grown up to be from a very radical feminist, or liberal feminist. Now when I'm in love with a man, I understand how men react to such situations. And I have made friends. My colleagues are men, and I've directed travel shows, so I've traveled across the country. So I've seen how men react. So I just want to understand from you guys, because you've studied so much, how has been the journey of men in this regard? Like, women. Sorry, this is a question from the other side, because I really want to understand why are they not changing? Why is the discussion from my grandmother to my mother's now it's the same? So I'm fed up. So yeah, it's just the voice of a fed up woman.
I just remember one interview. She can answer better, but I remember one interview of Maya Rao on that. You can answer better. I just remember one Maya Maya Rao's one interview, I mean, it is written Hindi mein hai likha. Since Anuradha was part of it, probably they went to do Om Swaha on dowry death in Delhi, one of the plays. And how, I mean, at one of the shows, probably the men intimidated and they had to actually run away. But at another, I believe the women came around and said that, I mean, so it's interesting from locale to locale now where you take the production, but she can say better about it. I'm talking about them.
Well, I think it had a long life, the play, so therefore it had, there were many different kinds of interactions, and so there were times where, especially in colleges at that time, an extremely difficult dialogue, because this is not exactly related to what you're saying, but I'm just saying one of the churnings that the young women had at that time was that in a college they said, so you've shown us this, what do we do next? It's not that we can't go home and say, we're going to get married. What do we do next? So this was something that actually ran with us for a long time. And what way do you make a play that makes a question? And the other thing that the moment you're mentioning, there were two actually. One was that it started with a great deal of intimidation, but ended not so. Actually, the men who at that point were saying, "Is park mein kaam nahi ho sakta." It's always space, no? It's always saying, "Yahan nahi kaam ho sakta, wahan nahi ho sakta." They sat down. So I think that, I mean, I don't think it was a very major thing, but it happened that way. And equally, there would have been many localities, for instance, in Jangpura, where the incident that actually made the play was happening. You had a lot of support. So I think that there was no way of stereotyping even that. The only one that actually surprised all of us, who was the very first version, was this kind of response from women's colleges, which was a response straight about thinking about what you can say and by what means.
Can I say one thing? I mean, in response to you, I just feel that as women, we should stop thinking about what men do. For ourselves. We need to stop thinking about what men want. They can like it, love it, stuff it. No, really, I'm serious. And it's like, I mean, I'm like much older than you, and over a long period of time one thinks, why don't men see differently? Right now I'm thinking, why do I care? I have to live. And women around me need to live their lives. And we can't live our lives if we keep thinking about why aren't men changing. Maybe we need a cannonball up their ass. But, somebody needs to do that. But right now, we live our lives.
There's one thing, if I do that.
This is a good note.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for hanging around, and thank you so much to Dr. Hameed and to Lata and to Anuradha, whom I'm sure would like us now to leave in a hurry. And thank you.
Production.
Yes, and thank you to Nikhil at Black Box Okhla for hosting these talks. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you.